This week on the video version of the Business of Tech, Gartner's human-centric work as we examine the state of play, Salesforce's experiments with no meetings, technical debt, robotic processes, and the state of managed services, Cyberbreach notifications become law, and Microsoft's big partner program changes. All this and more, hit those like and subscribe buttons, and here are this week's stories. Federal agencies must immediately adopt guidance on software supply chain security as required under the May 2021 Cybersecurity Executive Order, the Office of Management and Budget stated on Wednesday. Federal agencies must begin to adopt NIST's Software Supply Chain Security Framework and the related guidance effective immediately, tailoring it to the agency's risk profile and mission. CISA has warned about the Ragnar Locker gang, which the FBI says has breached at least 52 organizations from multiple U.S. critical infrastructure sectors. Specifically, Ragnar Locker operators terminate remote management software, examples ConnectWise and Kaseya, used by managed services providers to manage client systems remotely on compromised enterprise endpoints. Enable findings show that managed service providers are quickly overtaking their customers as a primary target for cybercriminals. The research also revealed that while 90% of the surveyed MSPs suffered a cyber attack in the last 18 months, the number of attacks these MSPs are preventing has also almost doubled from 6 to 11. 82% of MSPs have also seen attacks on their customers rise, though not quite at the same rate, with an average of 14 attacks prevented per month. DDoS and ransomware are among the primary attacks MSPs detect, but the top attack remains phishing. I also wanted to highlight a change in perception of open source software. 89% of IT chiefs believe open source software is as secure as proprietary software, according to a survey by IBM-owned Red Hat, the maintainer of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. This is from Red Hat's The State of Enterprise Open Source. Why do we care? Changing perceptions. That's my thought today. Open source isn't the risk it was. MSPs themselves are more the target than their customers. If I was still working for a vendor, I'd have taken the enabled data to imply how much security matters for MSPs. That's still true, but now my analysis adds the other side. MSPs are a greater risk even than their customers. It's about challenging assumptions, so-called best practices. Those change over time, and it's important not to forget that. I'm pondering a lot of those right now. Let's break this research out. Data from the IoT Inspector, which is an open source project to collect data on IoT devices, showing some scary insights. Smart home devices from major manufacturers, including Amazon and Samsung, appear to be using old, vulnerable software to handle the encryption of data from their devices. Researchers looked at device traffic to understand which versions of OpenSSL smart home products might use. The academics looked to understand what versions they believed to be running through fingerprinting. The result is 32 Amazon devices, including Echoes, 18 Samsung devices, and a smaller array of other products that appear to use outdated versions of OpenSSL. Why do we care? I was struck by how futile the idea of manage everything looks in a modern world. How can someone manage everything when it's not even possible to ensure they're all modern? Take a device like an Echo, as an example, not to beat up on them, and note how the device is essentially self-managed, yet also may be entirely out of date. I'm not convinced a software bill of materials entirely solves the problem. If you can't simply trust the device, how do you trust the bill of materials either? Which clearly needs to be zero trust. One can't trust everything. How many organizations are achieving this? So let's look at cloud costs. According to a Flexera's recently released 2022 State of the Cloud report, 66% of executives said cloud usage is higher than initially planned this year. They estimated that their organizations waste 32% of cloud spend, up from 30% in last year's survey. In addition, spend is likely less efficient and likely even higher on average, as many organizations tend to underestimate their amount of waste, the survey's authors report. In addition, respondents reported their public cloud spending was over budget by an average of 13% for the previous year. They expect their cloud spending to further increase by 29% in the next 12 months. Among small to medium businesses, 53% are now spending $1.2 million annually on cloud computing, up from 38% in 2021. The ZDNet article highlights FinOps, the practice intended to help organizations get maximum business value from the cloud by helping engineering, finance, technology, and business teams collaborate on data-driven spending decisions. Flexera's State of the Cloud says that as many as 53% of SMBs surveyed in the latest report are spending more than $1.2 million annually on the cloud. That's up from 38% last year. In this case, SMBs refer to companies with 1,000 or fewer employees. Cloud spending is up for organizations of all sizes, the report shows. As many as 8% of all respondents spend more than $60 million, and more than half spend over $2.4 million on the public cloud each year. And public cloud spending is even more significant among larger organizations. The average number of SaaS apps is now at 89 per organization, according to Okta, up 24% since 2016. Why do we care? I'm less convinced about FinOps specifically, although I'm on board with the concepts, just not sure we need another name for it. If I think about this from the value of a provider, I can break this down into good, better, best. It's good enough to keep things running. In good, actions are tied to SG&A spending. Better is to focus on reducing costs specifically, connecting IT spend to things in costs of goods sold, bringing operational costs down. Best is when the tech consulting can tie directly to the revenue numbers and drive growth. FinOps sounds a lot like my better, and frankly, I think we can do more. Gartner's latest research says only 29% of IT workers say they would stay with their current employers. The researcher recommends shifting to a human-centric model and rethinking assumptions about work. On working hours, progressive enterprises are empowering people and teams to decide when they do their best work and pioneering new schedules such as the 4-day week. On the office, the pandemic shattered the myth that employees can only get real work done in an office where managers can see them. Most organizations are now planning for a hybrid future that recognizes employees can be fully productive remotely for heads-down work. At the same time, the office is best suited for specific work activities such as human connection and collaboration. And on meetings, the culture of meetings started in the 1950s when people had to come together physically to make decisions. Now, asynchronous and synchronous collaboration tools enable distributed decision-making, collaboration, and creativity. Other reasons why people quit coming from new Pew research looking at 2021. The top reason? Pay was too low. People also quit because they felt disrespected. 48% said child care pressures forced their hand, while 18% cited vaccine requirements. 78% of those who quit a job say they are still employed. The Hustle had similar data. Looking at why people quit, about 27% of respondents left because they found a job with better pay. That reason was followed by finding a more rewarding job at about 17%, burnout also 17%, pursuing a new career path at 10%, lack of flexible work atmosphere at 8%, and starting a business at 6%. 64% of respondents switched to a new job immediately, and 83% of them made more money at their new job. Think this is not IT? According to Gartner data released last week, IT could be among the worst. IT workers have the lowest intent to stay in their jobs compared to all corporate functions. Tech workers who are in high demand across industry sectors are 10.2% less likely to remain in their current positions when compared to non-IT employees. Globally, less than 1 in 3 tech workers say they have a high intent to stay with their current employer. Intent to stay can vary by age. Just 20% of IT workers between 18 and 29 years old have a high likelihood of staying, compared to half of the workers between 50 and 70 years old. Nearly 4.3 million Americans quit their jobs in January, according to Job Openings and Labor Turnover Survey, or JOLTS, data published last week. That's down from December's revised sum of 4.4 million quits and marks the lowest monthly total since October. The reading marks an 8th consecutive month with more than 4 million workers walking out of their jobs. In a new survey from Upwork, 9.3% of respondents, roughly the equivalent of 19 million Americans, said they are planning to move because they can work remotely. Since 2020, 2.4% had already moved because of remote work. In a survey from Blind, 64% of workers at employers including Amazon, Microsoft, and Google would rather work from home than receive a $30,000 raise. And in data by the Chicago Fed, people want to work fewer hours than they did before March 2020, and some of that is because the pay is better. The findings suggest that the labor market is even tighter than many realize. Pay is better, especially for those at the bottom of the wage scale, and that means people aren't as desperate for more hours or a second job. Some data about conditions out there: apparel sales jumped 37.6% in February compared with a year earlier. Both outpaced overall retail sales, excluding automobiles, which were up 8.7%. Indeed, some people are dressing to get out again. And let's note, Americans are sad. A University of Michigan survey showed that overall consumer sentiment dropped for the 5th time in the last 6 months in March, falling to an almost 11-year low. Why do we care? The beginning and the end there tell a lot. It's essential not to ignore the context of the current mindset. The world is continuing to be a rough place. We're moving to endemic with COVID under the specter of war in Europe. Don't ignore that. Gartner's take is aligned with mine too. Disruptive new hours, disrupting the idea that the office is a must-have all the time, and breaking the idea of meetings. Think about when that started, the 1950s, when the physical meeting was the only option. The only option. There's some blocking and tackling to care about here too. People are looking for better pay, better hours, and less stress. If you're in the retention business, which we all are, think about how you're retaining your current people intentionally. I harp on experimenting, so let's focus on one. Quoting Insider. In October, several teams across the software giant Salesforce pivoted to asynchronous work, or in a way that didn't require real-time communication. They encouraged employees to cancel all meetings for a week, and the async week was so successful that Salesforce already scheduled 3 more this year. Lisa Marshall, the Senior Vice President of Salesforce's Technology, Marketing, and Products Innovation and Learning team, told Insider. About 1/3 of Salesforce's employees participated in the no meetings week, with the majority reporting higher productivity and less stress. According to surveys Marshall's team conducted afterward, almost all employees said it had a positive effect on them. Why do we care? The previous story is all about the state of the market and then Gartner's recommendations, and here we have a company experimenting with it. For those who think this is all theory, I wanted to show how it isn't. What are you testing in your planning for this year? Nearly 8 in 10 companies took on more technical debt in the last year, while only 6% have taken on less, according to a new survey. For 56% of companies, the additional technical debt was necessary to adapt to changing times. Another 48% said taking on technical debt was a deliberate act to capitalize on a new opportunity quickly. Consultant Deloitte and tech company Workday surveyed 600 executives globally and found that just 8% of CIOs strongly agree that the role of the IT department is increasingly strategic, that incremental technological improvements are critical to long-term success, and that their organization possesses high levels of data savviness. Many IT teams remain held back by stodgy processes. Almost half, at 45%, of CIOs say they need to innovate quicker, and 43% are under pressure to create greater enterprise agility. Forrester has data pointing to the flattening of the robotic process automation space, predicting the RPA software market will reach $6.5 billion by 2025, but with the caveat that growth will start to flatten as soon as next year as companies shift to more AI-fueled automation solutions. According to the 2021-2022 Zero State of Small Business Report, quoted by iWeb, 65% of small business decision makers have said technology has become more critical to their businesses since the start of the pandemic. CompTIA has released their Trends in Managed Services report, so here's quoting the data. Many MSPs capitalized on the mass move to remote work, outfitting and managing customer technology networks that were relocated from centralized office cubicles to home offices. 8 in 10 MSPs said their changes in the past 2 years have had a positive effect. Thus, 53% of MSPs are optimistic or very optimistic about their prospects over the next 12 months. But not all MSPs had that experience, and their concerns about the future are also reflected in the CompTIA survey results. Between 11 and 14% of respondents said they were either pessimistic or very pessimistic about the state of the managed services market and their own business over the next year. That compares to just 4% of a similar group of respondents who expressed unease about their future in a survey fielded last October. And on cybersecurity, a net 93% of MSPs said that the sophistication of cybersecurity is driving change in their business model, or will, within the next 12 and 24 months. Couple that with highlights from Channelnomics Channel Forecast 2022, citing revenue expectations falling short in 2021. 61% of channel partners polled said they plan to reinvest revenue this year to build new sales capacity. In addition, 45% said they'll make new investments to improve their marketing expertise. These are significantly above other growth drivers, such as increasing portfolio offerings at 24% and expanding geographic reach at 12%. Why do we care? They call it debt for a reason. You do have to pay it back eventually. There's distinctly room for much more business-linked IT delivery. On Monday, I outlined a good, better, best approach. In good, actions are tied to SG&A spending. Better is to focus on reducing costs specifically and connecting IT spend to things in cost of goods sold, bringing operational costs down. Best is when the tech consulting can tie directly to the revenue numbers and drive growth. The data here clearly points to that leap. There's a gap. Robotic process automation, for example, isn't useful without that net leap of why. It's not enough to be good. Business leaders will be looking for better or more. I'll note that the managed services market is amazing hype isn't supported by data. There's an increase in pessimism, not a decrease. That gap that I focus on is there is a difference between the haves and the have-nots, and it's widening. Did you know Cisco helps managed services providers directly? Know about the Cisco Partner Program? Focused on helping partners combine managed services expertise and service creation with innovative Cisco technology and proven go-to-market resources. There's a program option for you. With provider pricing, MDF, and marketing resources, coupled with Cisco's leading technologies including Meraki, Duo, and Umbrella, learn more with the link right in the show notes. Last week, a group of tech executives came together to announce SustainableIT.org, a nonprofit organization focused on advancing global sustainability through technology leadership. To drive transparency and progress toward a sustainable future, the goal is to unite IT leaders and experts worldwide to define best practices and standard metrics for all three pillars of sustainability: environmental, societal, and governance. As part of its mandate, sustainableIT.org will define sustainable transformation programs by industry, create best practices and frameworks, set standards and certifications, provide education and training, and raise awareness for environmental and societal programs that make organizations in the world sustainable for generations to come. Why do we care? I want to believe in this movement, but green IT has burned me in the past. Emotionally, I want to buy into this. Even big picture, with climate both a real issue and a buying pattern for some customers, this makes sense to me. That still leaves me skeptical. That said, this approach seems spot on, building the best practices and, more importantly, metrics for such a program. I'm offering it here as a resource and as a well-wisher. Congress passed the Omnibus Spending Bill, which includes expanding coverage of telehealth services under the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, a big win for telehealth companies. The provision does a few things. First, it extends coverage for certain telehealth services under Medicare and Medicaid for 151 days after the pandemic-era public health emergency comes to an end in April. Second, it adds audiology, occupational therapy, physical therapy, and speech pathology to its list of reimbursable telehealth services. Third, over the next year, the Medicare Payment Advisory Commission, an independent federal body that advises Congress on Medicare policy, is charged with studying the use and impact of telehealth services on patients with an eye to whether it diminishes the quality of care. The spending bill also, as noted previously, includes mandatory cyber incident reporting rules for critical infrastructure operators. CISA is up next to determine the specific rules here, as the legislation gives the agency up to 24 months to publish a notice of proposed rulemaking to implement the program. The president signed the bill into law on Tuesday. Senator Mark Warner of Virginia highlighted provisions in the law to grant companies immunity and stressed that the law was going about threat actors, not holding companies accountable. The SEC is considering a proposal to require public companies to report data breaches and other cybersecurity incidents within 4 days of discovery. Per newly proposed amendments to existing rules, listed companies would have to provide periodic report filings on policies, implemented procedures, and the measures taken to identify and manage cybersecurity risks. The amended rules would also instruct companies to update previously reported security breaches. There's also much activity now at the state level on privacy bills per coverage in Axios. While technology companies would prefer a federal law without movement, those companies are lobbying at the state level to prevent stricter laws like California's. Utah passed a bill that is now awaiting the governor's signature, which would make it the fourth state after Colorado, Virginia, and California, and Iowa, Tennessee, and Maryland are considering such bills. The question? How tough will they be? Why do we care? Why the telehealth note? Because that's all technology implementation, and it's now more widely covered. That's an opportunity. The cybersecurity disclosure laws were both inevitable and accelerated. Listeners could see this trend coming in the extensive coverage over the years. And the war in Ukraine just accelerated it. Just weeks ago, this was left out, and how quickly events change. I'm with the companies on the desire for a federal law and policy. I don't anticipate it, and instead we'll get this patchwork across the U.S., and I suspect two types of laws based on political party. Although the complexity can fuel both lawyers and IT companies, that doesn't seem like an excellent solution for the consumer. At the crossroads of geopolitics and cybersecurity, the German Federal Office for Information Security, or BSI, warned organizations against using Kaspersky antivirus software over fears it could be exploited for cyber espionage or launching cyber attacks amid Russia's ongoing war in Ukraine. While the office is not explicitly banning the use of Kaspersky software, the security agency is urging German organizations to replace products made by the Moscow-headquartered firm with alternative software from non-Russian vendors, warning that Russia's military and intelligence activities in Ukraine, along with its threats against Europe, NATO, and Germany, means there is a considerable risk of a successful IT attack. That from TechCrunch. Kaspersky responded, quote, "We believe this decision is not based on a technical assessment of Kaspersky products that we continually advocated for with the BSI and across Europe, but instead is being made on political grounds," the security company said on Wednesday. Quote, "We believe that peaceful dialogue is the only possible instrument for resolving conflicts. War isn't good for anyone." Why do we care? Know all those warnings about the supply chain? Yeah, that's this. When the security of the supply chain is brought up, it's not just about availability, it's also where those companies are located and what laws and wars they are involved in. I'm not making a judgment call about Kaspersky's technology. I will observe that Kaspersky's dismissal of politics is unrealistic and unviable. Technologists cannot ignore both politics and regulation in selecting tools. That's called supply chain management, a skill IT services companies will need to continue to develop. Google has made a change to their Google Stadia service again. On Tuesday at the Google for Games Developer Summit, the company made changes to the game streaming service. Two caught my eye. This year, Google will let any Stadia game developer offer an instantly accessible free trial of their game that will no longer require you to log into a Stadia account to play. Just a couple of clicks from YouTube, a Google search ad, social media, etc. Additionally, the company will let white-label partners like AT&T sign up to take Google's technology to offer free demos and paid games of their own, a B2B offering now dubbed Immersive Stream for Games. Why do we care? I've long predicted these streaming gaming services, including Microsoft's cloud streaming service, will also end up used in business. You don't have to squint as much to see how it can quickly develop. Sure, application streaming isn't new, but if it serves gamers, it will become a lot more mainstream and accepted. That's why we care to watch the space for maturity. In what I am sure is headline news for most IT services companies, Microsoft is making changes to their partner program. No longer the Microsoft Partner Network, it becomes the Microsoft Cloud Partner Program. Quoting from ZDNet, Microsoft officials will also be changing the areas in which partners will be certified, qualified, and scored as part of what officials call the first material change to the Microsoft Partner Network in 15 years. The new program will focus on how proficient partners are in 6 solution areas aligned with the Microsoft Cloud. The 6 areas of proficiency are data and AI on Azure, infrastructure Azure, digital and app innovation Azure, business applications, modern work, and security. Under the new program, there will be no longer a baseline member status plus silver and gold competencies and advanced specializations. Competencies will be phased out and replaced by 2 new qualifying levels beyond baseline, Solutions Partner and Specialist Expert. And Microsoft will move to a new Partner Capability Score and drop its current Partner Contribution Indicator score. Why do we care? If you're not selling Microsoft's cloud, they don't care. This shouldn't be a surprise, and hold your outrage if you have any. So everyone is a member. I suspect that many will end up in that modern work category, as small and mid-market cloud solutions, communications, collaboration and content, and Windows and device competencies all map to this one. While I don't usually talk about partner programs, with Microsoft noting 400,000 in their program, this one has significant reach. I'd expect most delivering IT services would be in the program, and now you have some homework. Barracuda released new data on spear-phishing. The report found that the average employees at smaller businesses, which have less than 100 employees, will experience 350% more social engineering attacks than an employee of a larger enterprise. That doesn't mean that smaller businesses are more targeted than large, simply that because they are smaller, an individual employee will see more attacks. Merely seeing more threats per person shouldn't make a company safer or less safe. Researchers at Imperium have analyzed hundreds of thousands of phishing websites and found that there has been a significant rise in websites explicitly designed for mobile phishing attacks, now making up 3/4 of all phishing sites. Mobile is the new risk area. And in an analysis by cybersecurity company Intel 471, 4 types of ransomware make up nearly 3/4 of reported incidents. Almost 1 in 5 reported incidents involved Conti ransomware, famous for several incidents over the past year, and nearly 30% of incidents were Lockbit 2.0. Speaking of Conti, while they had a pretty significant leak, turns out the damage didn't last. Experts say the notorious ransomware gang has pivoted all too easily, replacing much of the infrastructure exposed in the leaks while moving quickly to hit new targets with ransom demands. So just in time, NIST has detailed appropriate ways to assess an organization's adherence to the agency's go-to list of enhanced security requirements for protecting controlled but unclassified information. Why do we care? A smaller company will have individual employees seeing more attacks. This should result in more abilities to train them, and one has to do the training to get protection. And with the risk now on mobile too, so much more important. There's a certain comfort for me in the knowledge that there are 4 strains to focus on. The problem is less technical sophistication and more volume and ease of digital deployment. Not to say those aren't massive problems, but it's the systemized nature of the opponent more than their raw technical diversity. I have an interview coming out this weekend discussing the cybersecurity landscape related to the war in Ukraine. Look for that. And new data from the U.S. Census. 5.4 million people applied for small business licenses last year, a 53% jump from 2019, pre-pandemic. Global investment in startups shattered records in 2021, hitting $643 billion, 10 times what it was 10 years ago. Why do we care? Historically, there have been more IT companies formed during downtimes too. I'm not surprised by this data point and instead look at it as validation of the expectation. I'm expecting to see more new smaller entrants in the IT space and new potential small customers out there. That's some good news to go into the weekend with. Thanks for tuning in to This Week in the Business of Tech. Shows come out each week, pulling together the daily podcast. If you like this show, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. The content is here because of supporters like you. If you want access to shows early, answers to your questions, and private interactions, join our Patreon. It's pay what you want. You decide what the content is worth. Join at patreon.com/MSPradio. Patreons also get access to the written versions of every story as they come out. If you want the stories right away, you can get them on the daily podcast. Find The Business of Tech on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your shows. Subscribe links are at businessof.tech. Talk to you again next week.